Hi everyone, it's Jerry. Let's have a look at a game from round 9 of the 2018 Candidates Tournament. On the white end, Fabiano Caruana. He's paired against Ding Liren. So let's see what happened. We have a Catalan Opening. If you've been tracking this channel, you may recall that in round 1 of this tournament, Caruana with white against Wesley So had this exact position on board, where Wesley followed up with knight b to d7 and a5. Different game plan here. b6, and after knight c3, black tries to resolve the tension in the center by exerting pressure on c4, and is successful. The c-pawns are exchanged. White improves both kingside minors, and the bishop, having done its job, relocates to the main diagonal, supporting some development. White hops to an open file, and this knight, it's a strong piece, needs to be challenged. Knight c6 it is. The other thematic way to challenge the knight is this underdeveloping knight f to d7. One idea behind that is, well, in the event of a capture on e5, white isn't able to recapture and throw a punch on the f6 point. There wouldn't be a piece there. Now, this last move leaves black tactically vulnerable. White makes use of this fact. Capturing on d5 unleashes the rook. c6 is now hit twice. Black counters by capturing on d4. There is a threat against the queen, but first knight takes bishop check. Queen takes knight. Only now does white react. So some defense of e2. Pressure on the knight. Light square bishop's captured. Queen takes the knight. And black inserts this rook f to d8 move, getting on an open file, hitting the queen, and sidestepping any possibilities for a skewer. Bishop b4 is close by. Queen f4, only now, bishop to b7. The bishop's getting quite the workout, and is not done, as we will soon see. Bishop b4, queen e8, and rook c7. So let's just pause for a moment. 19 moves in. White has some aggressively positioned pieces, 2 of them in black's house, and certainly a much more aggressive queen, 4th-ranked queen versus a 1st-ranked queen. But black is on move and has a powerful reply, knight d5. What is it not hitting? This is forcing queen takes f7. Queens are now exchanged, and what to do? You don't capture the bishop here, as white would just take the bishop on b7, and not only be up a pawn, but also have the better positioned rook and knight. So the idea here is bishop a6. Second time the bishop is going to a6. And so white on move has to parry 2 threats, bishop and the pawn. Of course, saves the more valuable. And there goes the e-pawn. So the material with this last move is restored. And you may recall from my commentary in this round 1 game between Caruana and So, I drew some attention to a variation where white could go ahead and win a black b-pawn, but that would mean giving up an e-pawn. And I noted that the significance of the e-pawn when you have a bishop that's fianchettoed, it's very important to have an e-pawn when you have that bishop fianchettoed to be able to strike at the black center. In that round 1 game, black had a pawn on d5, and the move e4 would be necessary to extend the scope of your kingside fianchettoed bishop. Now, in this position, of course, white doesn't have a kingside bishop, and that fianchettoed bishop was taken out. But without the e-pawn, that e-pawn is still very important in this position. Without the e-pawn, that means the knight can enjoy some great stability. Now, we're at move 22. This knight is a rock. He doesn't budge until move 49. That's a long while from now, and this is a very lengthy game. This one goes to about, I believe, move 67, and it was nearly a 7-hour battle. Now, this is a monster piece. Continuing, rook c1, bishop h5. Rook only has one good square. And bishop to e8. So if you've been tracking this bishop's moves, we're at move 24, black has made a third of the moves have been made by that light square bishop. Quite the workout. And from here, he's on the back rank, but he's useful. I was drawing some attention already to the black knight on d5, but the white knight on e5 is very good as well. But the bishop is there to keep the knight under control. So some small improvements from here. King g2, a5, expanding on the king side. Pair of rooks is off. g4. Bishop's ready to be trapped, so square is provided. b4, bishop b2. And on this move 30, we have a4. This is an important moment in the game. It's not going to show up a great deal in the evaluation. You're going to see a great shift in the evaluation at this moment. But, these pawn moves, they're a big deal in the game. We have a4, but a move to strongly consider here for black is h5. Now, this would pose white a serious question. What do you do here? Do you maintain your pawn on g4 with f3, or do you play g5? If you play f3, this leaves the white king a little bit more vulnerable. There's already one possibility for a check, and now there's a second. 2 squares for the knight. And without the pawn on f2, maybe the king is a bit more exposed on the second rank, should this rook ever get active. And the other decision, in reply to h5, would be g5, but we can observe here that we don't have really the type of harmony we would like between structure and bishop here. And a new square would be available for this strong knight on d5. Don't be surprised if this type of structure came about if the knight repositioned to f5 to exert some pressure against h4. This was a serious possibility for black on this move 30 to play h5. In the game, however, it's a4, and white no longer gives black this opportunity to play h5. White plays h5 himself. Continuing, rook a8. So at any moment, the a file can be peeled open, and this rook can be activated. White improves. King to f8. In fact, here's something to note. Black really doesn't have an active plan in this position, but rather has to sit and wait. And so we're going to observe a lot of just nothing moves, kind of passing moves by black. And we're really at a point where how will white go ahead and try and make some progress? Again, everything is kind of pointing to the black knight on d5. Let's see what it's doing. I mean, it's guarding c7. There's no rook invasion. It's guarding b4. There's, white can't put pressure on the b4 pawn. Well, even if white puts pressure on b4, it's not going to be enough. And c6 is controlled. The rook can't go to c6. If the rook goes to c5, what is it doing from c5? It's tough to see how white improves further. Bishop does a good job. It's on the back rank, but again is neutralizing the knight on e5. So let's see how white tries to make some progress here. First we have knight f3. Again, kind of nothing moves on the black side. A little bit of back and forth as we see knight f3, knight back to e5. And let's see how white tries to make some progress here. So repositioning the knight, a little back and forth, and eventually comes up with this organization. f3 is in, so any pawn move is making just a little bit of progress. So some security on the third rank in the event of some line where the rook gets active on a3 and picks off the b pawn. It wouldn't be hitting with check now that the pawn is on f3. King h4. So this is just after move 40, and the players have banked an additional 50 minutes on the clock. What is white's idea with this kind of decentralizing move, king to h4. Well, let's see. King g5 follows. White's trying to get in this h6 move, kind of put a dent in this pawn duo. Black doesn't allow this. Black plays h6, and so the king is flushed back and goes back to g3. So what is accomplished exactly with these four tempi? King h4, g5, h4, back to g3. Well, by inducing this h6 move, there's a new possibility for the knight. He now has a square to jump to, g6. There are some mating ideas that can certainly surface with the knight on g6, and if you could envision one day a white rook gaining control of the back rank, possible mating ideas. King here, rook on h8, knight on g6, that'd be mate. So, after king h7, knight d3, let's see how white tries to organize here. Finally, the a-pawns are exchanged. The knight is repositioning. It's strong on e5, but once more, the bishop had it under control. So he's trying a different post. From c5, it watches over b3, puts some pressure on e6. Bishop f7, rook to e1, and I was saying that this knight didn't budge, or wouldn't be budging for a while. Move 49, this is where it now goes elsewhere. Knight e7. So looking at a knight c6 move, this pawn can't be successfully captured in this position. It is hit twice. What would be the issue in this position capturing on e6? This would allow black to play knight c6 and then follow up with rook to e8. And this is essentially forcing the rooks to be exchanged. So for example, computer gives knight f8 and then says go ahead and exchange rooks. These pawns will be exchanged, and with the pawns just on one side of the board, there really isn't enough to generate winning chances here for white, even though white is up a pawn. Bishop can return, the knight can hit the pawn for a second time, and yeah, the b-pawns will be exchanged, and it'd be difficult to see how white converts this, even though white would be up a pawn. Long story short, capturing on e6 isn't really going to be good enough to convert this into a win. Bishop b2 in the game, knight c6, and here we go with f4. Possibilities for g5, this would be dropping h5, but maybe given some time you could look for the king returning to h4 and then trying g5, g6. That's getting very serious. That would be getting very serious for the black side. First things first, the bishop is under fire. That's defended. But white also gives something up with this last move. The bishop's defended, but b3 is no longer defended. So black takes this opportunity to play e5. The bishop can now see, starts to become an active piece. F takes e. Bishop takes b. Both pawns are passed. White gets pushing. White also has an ideally placed rook right behind this passed pawn. How does it get stopped? In the game, it's rook a7. Computer suggests that, well, that's not best. Wants to keep some pressure on the bishop and instead immediately blockade with the knight. In the game, however, rook a7, knight c5 follows. There's some pressure on the bishop, so a new square is c4, and this is allowing knight d7. So with this last move, what exactly is the knight doing? What sticks out to you here? Knight d7 is interfering with the rook's defense of g7. That already has some pressure on it. This is a position where we're working with opposite color bishops. If white could somehow coordinate on the dark squares, in particular on g7, it's going to be very difficult to defend. We know who won't be able to help defend the dark squares. So dark squares are sensitive. g7. Why am I drawing some attention to this? Well, if you could envision the rook somehow getting to that 7th rank, f7 in particular, It's going to be a big problem for Team Black. Continuing, bishop b5, knight f8 check. This is where white could look for a rook lift and then sneaking in for this idea, but in the game, it's knight f8. King g8, knight g6, making use of this square. This little h6 move was provoked many moves ago, about, I believe, 15 moves ago. We had h6. The knight's making use of that square now. g6. Knight e7. There's an issue with this last move, knight to e7. Can you spot what Caruana's next move is? Feel free to pause the video. Okay. In the game, Caruana makes the best move, and that is rook a1. This is a move that has the evaluation at about a +3. Huge move in the game, rook a1. What is the idea behind this? Well, first off, if the rook is captured, that would allow white to win a piece by first taking the knight with check. Black could counterpunch at the knight, but white addresses that threat, hits back, and only then takes the rook. In the end, white just won a knight. So what else is black to do? Well, if the rook goes out of the way, let's say to b7 or c7, if you go to b7, none of the black pieces are coordinated on any of the back rank squares. This would be a checkmate in 5. Black would have to give up all the pieces, and in the end, we could see this wonderful symmetry, wonderful synergy between h5 pawn and a knight on g6. This is a wonderful mating idea to be familiar with. And another move, rook c7, would not work either because of the back rank problem. You wouldn't be getting mated here, but certainly black would be losing some material. Blocking with the rook, the knight would fall, and blocking with the knight, we have these little tricks that are in the air. So what does black do here after Caruana's rook a1 move? Unfortunately, has to return. It was just on c6. It went to e7, but after this rook a1 move, the knight has to now go back and defend the rook. So basically a wasted move on black's end. So now the rook goes to d1. So from here, king h7. The king is getting off of this back rank. Doesn't want the rook to get to the back rank with check. It'd be that much faster for this little mating net on h8. Continuing, rook to d5. Bishop has to go somewhere else. White would like to get this in. Rook to f1, but the bishop is there. Rook f1, even getting into f8. Somehow get to that back rank. In the game, it's rook d5, bishop a4, and now king to f4. So white could try rook d2, trying to get over like this. I guess in the computer's eyes, the move rook to f7 allows a bishop to c2 move. Still a strong continuation for white to go straight in for this idea. In the game, however, white looks to now activate the king. Take note also of the clock times. Both are now beyond move 60. They've gained all the bonus time they're going to get for the rest of the game. And, well, let's see. King f4, bishop c2, and now rook forces the bishop back. There's a fork against the minor pieces, so bishop a4. And now g5, continuing a capture on g5. And it's important that the rook recapture. If you capture with the king here, this allows black to trade rooks, rook a5. White wants to keep the rooks on because the black king is more vulnerable. Again, these little mating ideas connected with the knight. So rook takes g5. Is pointing out that getting the rook to f7, somehow converging on g7 with the bishop would be nice. So doing so, whether it be along a rank or Now a file, this is a sensitive point for black. In the game, it's knight to d8, and what follows is rook e5, bishop e8, and after e7, this last move comes with a draw offer. Caruana offers Ding Liren a draw, and it is accepted. This game ends as a draw. What's the idea here? Well, black could simply play knight c6, keep pressure here, and there's a punch thrown at the rook. What to do? Let's say the rook moves. The king could sneak over, and soon this pawn will be hit for a third time, and is soon to fall. So a draw is agreed at this point right here, after e7. Caruana, at this moment in the game, does have a win. Now, I watched the press conference, after the game was over, the press conference between these two players, and both of them missed a very sneaky move. White has, in this position, knight f8 check, and there's a couple pretty neat continuations that I'd like to share with you. For one, after this knight f8 move, this would be a winning continuation, but no, the clock time's not a lot of time here. Knight f8, if king h6, white's going to be mating. The idea here, king g4, and now there's a mate threat. Now that h5 is defended, rook g6. You can only defend this with a check. King h4, and now how do you stop rook g6 mate? There's only one way you could do it. Well, actually, two ways. You could do it like that, but that would be mate. But here's the cooler one. Bishop c2. And that would be met with, well, I'll throw this as a pop quiz. What would be the winning continuation for white from this position? Feel free to pause the video. Okay, this is a checkmate in 2. Rook g6 check. You could allow your rook to be captured, and then bishop c1 is mate. That's a cool one. Now, the other continuation in the continuation that both players missed is that with this move knight to f8 on move 66, after the players have been going at it for nearly 7 hours, king g8 can be met with the sneaky pawn move h6, giving up the knight because h7, and then the pawn couldn't be stopped. This is something both players said that they completely missed in the game, this little variation. Caruana was pointing out he was trying to work out that after king g8, could he capture on g7 and then follow up with something like e7 straight away, and you couldn't quite make that work. And in fact, the computer says that this isn't working for white, but that's one of the things that Caruana was looking at. But h6 at this point, taking advantage of the pinned pawn, and you can't take the knight because the pawn slips by. White's going to be producing a new queen shortly, and that would be a decisive advantage. But it just didn't turn out that way. White was, of course, pressing for the great majority of this game, but Ding Liren came up with a strong enough defense and held out with a draw in this one. So if you're curious about the tail to tape on this one, this right here, once more, is the final position. Tail to tape on this one, looking at the zipping through here, advantage the whole way through, and some serious advantages for white, some ups and downs, but in the end, wasn't enough to take home the full point. Caruana 0-1-2 for the inaccuracies, mistakes, blunders, 24 average centi-pawn loss, and a 0-5-1, 25 average centi-pawn loss for Ding Liren. Anyhow, as usual, feel free to leave any feedback to this video in the comments section below, and I hope you enjoyed it, maybe took a thing or two away from it. That's all for now. Take care. Bye.